Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our little Lamoille Broadband Conference. I'm so glad you made it here. Not everybody made it. Some folks actually asked me to set up a conference call, so we have a few folks on the phone. But the two of our presenters are still on the road to arrive within 5 to 20 minutes. So it's all good. I hope they will arrive safely. I would like to spend here maybe until 8 o'clock, and the reason I'm saying that is because the conditions are going to be augmenting, so we get on the road by 8 o'clock. But when I set up this meeting, I was hoping that we could focus our efforts today and our discussion on one possible method of moving forward with improving broadband in our communities, and that's a communication union district. I do want to acknowledge that there are some potential other approaches where an individual town could pursue broadband improvements. And if we have time and if you have questions, we can talk about those as well. Our three presenters, that they'll introduce themselves in a little more depth, but we have Chris Campbell is coming from Tilson Technologies. He has been involved with telecommunications for many years, now is in a broadband consulting business. We have Chris Recchia, who is coming from, he's representing an ISP provider, Ballynet. This is a nonprofit organization that is working in conjunction with Vermont's first communication union district, EC Fiber. So I think that'll be an interesting angle on one of the things I will ask him to discuss is the relationship between the municipality, the district, and the provider. And here with us is Rob Fish. And perhaps we are going to restructure things a little bit. So I've asked Rob to start. And then when our other two speakers will arrive, we'll do your introductions so that they know who they're talking to. Rob, you can just accept the audience in general.
I'm just gonna dance.
So Rob, if you could please tell us, about your job, what you do, and then perhaps, there will be a couple of pieces of information that Rob will begin with. The department has some new data as far as broadband fiber availability in Vermont, so he will go over those briefly. They're updates to the figures you may have seen. And then he will also provide a statewide overview of what's going on with municipalities or municipal efforts in terms of broadband improvements. Take it away, Rob.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. If we're going to build out broadband, I'm going to need to see a lot more of you over the next few years. So if we're going to make this happen, it's going to take a community effort. It's going to take all hands on deck. First, I just want to say this isn't something that the federal government or the state government is going to all of a sudden have millions and millions of dollars to dump into. Broadband is expensive, broadband is complicated. But first, a little background about myself. My name is Rob Fish. I started working at the Public Service Department in November of last year, so I'm still relatively new at this. My title is the state's Rural Broadband Technical Assistance Specialist. How my job's been described as me is I'm personally responsible to bring broadband to every single person in Vermont. So thank you. So my role is to work with communities, to work with regional planning commissions, to work with individual communities, to work with providers across the state to accomplish that goal, to find innovative methods to bring broadband to everybody. So I'm going to quickly touch on some of our new statistics. This just came out last week. Some of you may have seen a map I had at a previous meeting that had the breakdown of coverage in Lamoille County. And I've also passed around to everybody a map that zooms in that is associated with this data, and this is the breakdown by town. Does anybody not have one of those? Oh, well, let's get it. There.
Thank you.
So first I want to say, if anyone has seen the data from last year, this data is a little bit different. We have more accurate data, and we've counted some things as premises that previously weren't. So you'll see some of these numbers aren't heading the direction we want them to head. But with that said, we now do have some fiber. We do have areas, 3.6% of the premises in the county have access to 100 by 100. 55% of the county is covered by 25.3, so that's cable, or in some rare cases DSL. And then 89.9% has 4.1 or better, so that's DSL. But still 10% of the county, or 1,298 addresses, do not have service even at 4.1. The definition of broadband right now is the 25.3, according to the state. And the state goal is 100 by 100 by 2024. See, we have a long ways to go. Now, I would love to just open it up and hear your reaction as to these numbers and any questions about where the data came from. And
So the 100 or better is all Comcast?
the Comcast would be the 25 by 30. That doesn't mean you can't get a download speed of over 100 or even a gig. But the 100 by 100 is symmetrical. So it's the same speed of downloading something as well as uploading something. Only fiber can provide that at this point.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Did you say the state's goal was 100
100 by 100 by 2024 for everybody.
Is this,
It's very aspirational, but we're doing what we can to make it happen.
is this graph available online?
It is now. As of today, you can download a spreadsheet that shows for every single town in the state. It also has the statewide maps. The individual maps by county are not available except by request. I can certainly send you the file as well.
Okay.
So who's providing the 3.6% now? Which companies?
So the 3.6% right now, some of it is probably, most of it I believe is probably in Stowe. Some of Stowe cable is fiber now.
Looks like Cambridge is. Cambridge does some.
Yes, I guess some of Cambridge as well. Yeah, and on the edges of the map, it's not Lamoille County, but you'll see Craftsburg out there. Okay, yeah.
So yes, I don't know, did you hear, Barry, about the two providers that you
Yeah.
mentioned? Okay.
So the next map I want to show you, and once again, this is from as of August 2019. That's not to say that there hasn't been some additional build out by Stowe Cable. The next map I want to show you is what's happening around the state. So around the state, next Tuesday, 44 towns are voting to form communication union districts. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are on the next few slides, and some of our other presenters can get more into depth with it. This includes a lot of towns in the Northeast Kingdom, as well as most of Bennington County and a few down in Windham County in the Deerfield Valley. There's also study areas for all of Windham County and then the Kingdom, as well as a few towns in the Kingdom here, in Lamoille County, that are looking into forming a communications union district. There's a few other things that are happening. The town of Marlborough, they're trying to do everything. They've issued an RFP for service. They're looking to join a CUD, and they're part of the study area. So there's a lot happening, and I don't want to get into CUDs at this point, but just to show the success, if you look at the light purple there, that's EC Fiber. One of our guests is going to tell you a whole lot more about it. The map on the other side is showing where fiber is in the state. It's showing where 100 by 100 is available. Lines up pretty well, doesn't it?
Thank you for your patience. So my name is Chris Campbell, and the company I'm with is Tilson Technology Management. Very briefly, Tilson is telecommunications and IT group that's headquartered in Portland, Maine, but we have offices all around the country, and I work out of my home in Montpelier, Vermont, where I live because prior to joining Tilson, I was with the state of Vermont for about 20 years in the various telecommunications policy and implementations positions. Just a way of introduction, Tilson is both of these guys. We have a telecommunications network services group that does, actually installation, maintenance, design, those sorts of things, as well as Broadband Consulting Group, which is the group that I work for. And we work for basically everybody who implements or is thinking about funding or building telecommunications networks. So we do work both for companies who deliver services, but we also work with municipalities, counties, state broadband programs, investor groups. And part of the reason I'm here today is one of the groups that we're working with is the group in the Northeast Kingdom that is looking to form a communications union district. So we conducted what was called a pre-feasibility study for that group, where we looked at different combinations of towns and ultimately recommended a single CUD for that region, which is what they're currently pursuing. We did that in December 2019. We're currently working with them on doing a high-level design for fiber optic networks in that region and a business case analysis. And we're also, as part of that business case analysis, looking at the impact of different grant funding opportunities that are coming up this year and in the coming years. So very briefly, I'm going to walk you through the high points of Vermont Communications Union Districts. This is an abridged version of the powers of a Communications Union District. I think the powers in Vermont statute runs to about 23 items. But these are some of the major things that the Communications Union District does. So basically, Communications Union District is a specialized form of municipality. It's designed to own, operate communications networks, deliver communications services. It's made up of member municipalities. You need you need multiple municipalities in a communications union district. It can seek out grant funding for developing communications networks, and it can enter into financing arrangements, pledging net revenues. And we'll come back to that. So CUDs, to form a CUD, you start with 2 or more existing municipalities, 2 towns. And those 2 towns take a public vote at an annual or special town meeting. So the Northeast Kingdom, they're going to be voting this town meeting day to form that communications union district. And then in the May following the vote to form the district, there's an organization meeting. So there's a vote to form it, and then it really first starts to take action and organize itself on the second Tuesday in May, forming the CUD formation vote. Municipalities each appoint a primary member to the board of the CUD and an alternate. So it's a one town, one vote kind of arrangement on the board. It is possible after the CUD is initially formed, other municipalities can join it. The process for that is a little bit different. There's an application by the legislative body, like the select board, to the CUD's board. The CUD has the option to say yes, no, yes, with these terms and conditions applied to the enlargement of the CUD. So we talked a little bit about what CUDs can do. There's a few important things to highlight. Again, a slightly abridged version, but here are some of the major things a CUD cannot do. It can't tax property in the CUD, except if it's authorized to do so by the legislature. It can't accept funds from its member municipalities that come from that taxing power. And it also can't offer any PUC regulated service without first getting authorization from the PUC. Now, broadband itself is not a PUC regulated service, but for an example of a PUC regulated service would be cable TV service. You're offering a fiber optic network and offering broadband and cable TV service. The PUC is the franchising authority for the state. You need to get a franchise from the PUC in order to do that. Governance of a CUD, as I said, it's a one town, one vote kind of a system. And all of the towns are represented individually on that. Now that can result, I remember I said, you need 2 or more CUDs, towns to form a CUD. The existing CUD in the states, all have more than 10 or 20 towns. You can imagine that, governing your day-to-day business, that might get a little unwieldy. So CUDs can form committees. They can form an executive committee. They can form other committees. The committees other than the executive committee can have representation that aren't necessarily board members. In addition, a CUD that's well up and running and has planned as offering services, you would expect that management would the management of the day-to-day operations would transition to professional management, operating under the general direction of the board. So it's not as if the governance of large CUDs with large numbers of towns is definitely an issue to be dealt with. It's not as if you would expect the board to be involved in every single day-to-day decision of the organization. I know we're focused primarily on communications union districts tonight, but I will mention, because it's come up in some conversation with the Planning Commission, and also we're in contract negotiations with town of Newbury, where they have this other entity called a Rural Economic Development Infrastructure District. So these are similar in some ways to CUDs, but they're not limited to communications. They're for broader infrastructure purposes that can include communications. They're formed by the legislative body of the municipalities. They can contain just part of a municipality. You only need one municipality for a rural economic development infrastructure district. It can be more than one municipality, but you only need one. And the expansion process is a little different. The municipality in the area you want to expand applies to the governing board of the district. So, but not identical to CUDs, but have, there's a substantial overlap in terms of the powers in a rural economic development infrastructure district. And that's the overview at a really high level. I just put up here, for the non-abridged version, here are the relevant sections of the Vermont statute that authorize these 2 types of municipal entities.
They replace sleeping pills, right?
Yeah. What?
They replace sleeping.
Well, if you're like me and you kind of live and breathe this, no, they're like thrillers. That was, I know that was a lot in a short period of time. And any questions on that? Yeah.
Question. So I know rural economic development is big with the federal government right now.
Yeah.
Is there some advantage to a ready versus a cut in that context?
In terms of federal programs?
Yeah, in terms of funding.
I don't think so. No, I think it would probably be about the same for either one. I think here's the only advantage that I would see. I think that, and I'm not, because of their history, I would imagine that you would more likely use a communications union district if you were offering services directly, right? So I think a rural economic development infrastructure district, it would be more something that you might do to form a public-private partnership with another, with a company that is offering services. So it might affect the way that you approach it, right? You might, I think that if you were, as the CUD, to be, if you were going to directly apply for some of the major federal programs, like USDA programs around Reconnect or the FCC programs, some of those programs require you to be the service provider, the internet service provider. And an ISP or a communications union district might be better suited to those kinds of opportunities. That said, if you're not already a communications union district up and running, or you don't already have a track record, you're going to have a hard time applying to those anyway, and you might be better off in a public-private partnership. There's nothing to say that a communications union district couldn't provide their services in a public-private partnership. And I think actually I would characterize EC Fiber as a form of public-private partnership in their relationship with ValleyNet. And I think the model that we're examining in the Northeast Kingdom, it also includes the idea of a public-private partnership in that kind of operation.
Would either of them be less likely to accept ownership of the network as something belonging to the municipality?
You mean would they be less likely to accept ownership of the infrastructure? I think I have we don't have as many examples of ready districts that are up and running as for communications infrastructure. I mean, the one I think it's fair to say that's farthest along is Newbury, and I think we'll get more information when we get a little bit deeper into that consulting engagement. But I think that there is likely to be some form of ownership there. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I would imagine that if you were a communications union district, it might be a little bit odd if you didn't own your infrastructure at some point in the process. But I don't think it doesn't strike me as being an absolute requirement either.
It's not exactly what EC Fiber said, but okay.
Yeah. Well, so actually, do you bring up EC Fiber? You're correct that EC Fiber is, is a mixture of infrastructure that they own, and for instance, they've got some infrastructure that is owned by the state, right? And that they have that. So I certainly think that a mix of it wouldn't be unusual. I guess what would strike me as being a little unusual is if you had a communications union district that never owned any of its infrastructure. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that there's anything that would absolutely preclude that either.
So I have two questions. First of all, in the Ready District, it looks like it's easier to, if you will, gerrymander an unserved area. It's from what I've read about grant funding.
Yeah.
They're primarily interested in unserved and underserved areas. So if you could tailor your district to only cover unserved areas as opposed to the whole town. Example, Johnson, we got some places that have no service, and some places, 70% of the town is serviced by Comcast.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't want, so 70% excludes us from a lot of public funding. But the other 30%, could we form, it looks like a Ready district can be formed of just the 30%, whereas a communications union district has to include the whole town.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think you definitely, for a communications union district, your building blocks are municipalities.
Whole town.
Yeah, whole towns. And you have a little bit more flexibility. I think that it isn't necessary. Now, on the flip side of that, I don't think it's a requirement that a communications union district serve 100% of the territory within the district. However, people might ask, well, why am I a member of this district and it doesn't serve me, right? So,
Yeah, like a communication union district, they're gonna build out the unserved places first. They're gonna build out the places, they're gonna build out the streets that have access to cable last because it's a lower take rate. But for any of the federal funding, if it becomes available, there's no reason that you couldn't, to say that the funding is to serve these residents, that you're not overbuilding. So you can draw the boundaries as you like. The boundary doesn't have to be the boundary of your cut.
Did you just say that in order to get fiber, we have to get Comcast to go away?
No. I'm saying that in most cases, whether it's with federal funds or whether it's with EC Fiber, for instance, or anything, or any new business model, you're going to serve the areas that aren't served by cable first because you're going to have the most customers there. It doesn't mean you're not eventually going to serve areas with cable, and it doesn't mean that you aren't going to cross those areas and have to provide service.
That's the Comcast areas are where the density is, so you're going to kind of have to service those areas just to get to where you need to go.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know about for me, but for you, I hope so.
I'm wondering, what are the other purposes of a ready district,
I think they're generally for infrastructure projects.
Beach road thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not, an expert in all of the applications of ready districts, but I think I've seen things like, water and,
Water or sewer, like
Yeah.
little community, community water facilities, sewer facilities, things like that.
Things that we probably in Johnson wouldn't want to bite off or transfer out of the. Okay.
I was just looking for the camel's nose on
yeah.
And I had a follow-up question. So either of these, the ready or the cut, who owns the infrastructure?
So I don't think that either form necessarily predetermines, what the infrastructure ownership looks like, right? So you could have, I think, either form develop infrastructure and lease it or, charge for the use of it. You might have, other forms of public-private partnership. You might have a communications infrastructure that's built by the state, or you might have communications infrastructure that is built by a private company and used under contract by the communications union district, for instance. So
Just to be clear though, like for a public-private partnership, you will have an ownership stake in it. If you're contracting for services, like say it's the incumbent telephone company or a local provider that wants to build out and still own the infrastructure, it's contracting for service. And the laws governing what funds you can use for that contract are different than if you own the infrastructure.
Say that all again.
I will attempt to say it again. There's a new web page up on our website as of this morning that details it a little bit more. We finally had some people look over it. But once again, it's not legal advice. It's just trying to, for informational purposes. And what we were able to differentiate between contracting for service. So say like out here we have MC Fiber and Kingdom Fiber, and there's also Consolidated. And if they come to your town and say, okay, we want to work with you, we want to enter into a contract, well, we will build out the rest of your town. And they still own the infrastructure. That's contracting for service. If you have an arrangement with, whether it's your town or as a CUD, with a company to build out the infrastructure on behalf of the town, where the town still owns it, that would be a public-private partnership. There's different rules governing what funding can be used for both.
It's a subject of, it's defined by the contract you have with whoever builds it and whoever is the internet service provider.
So the only way for us to own it is if we pay for it.
Or contract, as long as the contract's in there, we don't have to pay for it explicitly. We just have to make sure that if they're gonna get that contract, then they gotta give us the ownership of it. I'll be damned if I want EC Fiber to own the network and EC Fiber goes under and we're screwed, you know, that doesn't make any sense. And
But the only way-
likewise, anybody
The only
else.
way you're gonna contract for it is if you pay for it.
Right.
Well,
And maintain it.
one,
Well, no, you contract for the maintenance,
some-
but you gotta come to the
some way.
table with money.
Maybe we should try to bring it back to the looking at cuts and looking at what could work here to provide universal service for all the towns. It's just a thought.
Excuse me. Hello?
Yep.
Okay, this is Dennis Shanley. It's a little difficult to hear, but I believe I heard someone say that it's not necessary to provide service to all residents. And I'd like to disagree with that. I know that when we had the Backroads Broadband grant in Cambridge, we were mandated to, or the Fairplay was mandated to provide service to everyone who had either phone or electrical service for more than 6 months a year. I think that in the spirit of the electric co-ops in the 20s and 30s, we need to, if we're going to form an organization that provides broadband in town, we can't afford to leave anyone out. But because we've got kids in school back in some of those houses in the woods.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that anybody would be let out. I was more saying the order that an area would be served, as well as for various grant programs, there's different criteria. For some of the criteria, it's serving the least served, the people who have no access to start. So I was more referring to not overbuilding cable.
Well, thank you. I'm going to step in a little bit, and I apologize. We are doing things a little bit in an unusual order. But, we've just, Chris Recchia just arrived from the farthest of us all, so I'm so glad that you
Thank
made it.
you. I'm glad to be here. And Vermont is, it's tough to get around because you can't get there from here.
Right.
And so now that we are almost in the full setup, I was hoping that we could do a round of introductions because it would be beneficial for all of the speakers to know who is attending. And then once we do that, maybe you can, Chris, talk a little bit about EC Fiber, ValueNet with those questions that we've prepared. So how about we start over there with Hans?
I'm from Lamoille Planning Commission.
Jeff, I'm on the Waterville Planning Board.
Mike Davidson, I'm on the Wolcott Select Board.
Matt Kinney from the Johnson Select Board.
I'm Rebecca, I'm a student at NVU Johnson.
Mark Delaney, Town of Cambridge.
I'm Charlotte Reber, I'm on the Johnson Fiber Committee.
I'm Charles Gallagher, Johnson Fiber.
Robin Story, Johnson Fiber.
Brian Story, Johnson Town Administrator.
Doug Mouldy, Johnson Select Board. Barry Cohen, Johnson Broadband Committee.
Michael Rooney, Hyde Park Fiber Committee, plus a EC Fiber sponsor in Braintree.
Oh, cool. Good. Thank you.
Jack Wall, Hyde Park Fiber Committee.
And on the phone from Wolcott, we have
Dennis Shanley from the town of Cambridge, and I'm working with the CDAC as a volunteer.
Okay, is anybody else on the phone?
Yes, Kip Werner with Belvidere. I'm helping do some of the planning on the broadband.
Thank you. Anybody else? Bruce from Wolcott, are you on the phone still? Maybe not. So that's it. So Chris, so far we've talked a little bit about the statewide overview of what's happening with the Communication Union District. And Chris Campbell laid out some statutory basics for us for Communications Union District.
Yep.
So we were hoping you can talk a little bit about your case study or your partnership and what's been going on with EC Fiber / Valley.
And Chris, before you start, earlier we showed this slide up here
Beautiful.
that shows
Okay.
EC Fiber and
Yep.
shows where the fiber is available in the state and how it matches up.
Oh, very
To
good.
try to drive home the point of that
Yep.
cuts can work.
Excellent, thanks. Are these actually doing anything tonight? Okay, very good. So, all right, thank you. There you go. Well, thank you all very much, and I am so sorry I'm late. It was very slow going, but I'm here, and I'm not off the road, which is really good, and a variety of people are. So for EC Fiber, you know, I've been with them for about a year, a little less, and actually my employer is ValleyNet, which is the design, build, operate company on behalf of EC Fiber, and we have the mission to bring broadband to every home in our 23 towns, and we're doing that. We have about 1,000 miles of fiber that we have constructed. We have about 4,300 customers. I hope ultimately to finish the main build this year, with the exception of Hartford, and that would bring us to about 1,200 to 1,400 miles of fiber, and I hope, about 7,500 customers. We started this, EC Fiber started this as a private entity, truthfully. It was very hard to get started. They started with a couple of investors who started thinking that this would be a good thing to do, and constructed about 200 miles before they started to get support and move forward. And frankly, you know, it's been a long kind of slog for us. We started in 2011, you know, as a result of the towns joining a CUD, the first in the state, we actually were able to then transition to revenue bonding, and have done $42 million in revenue bonding. The last tranche of that was in the fall of last year, and we did $10 million, got the best rate that we have gotten so far because people are starting to see that we can actually do this. I think it's fair to say that we've learned some lessons along the way, and we do think that it's possible to do this. We don't think it's possible to do it for one town alone. The dilemma is that a town that has the ability to do it alone probably also has already substantial overbuild of Comcast and others who are doing this work, but they will never desire to reach the outside rural people. And so we feel like we need to do that. That's our mission. We usually start from the outside of a community and work our way in, and don't overbuild until it's proven necessary or economical to do that. As a nonprofit, we have been able to do this cheaper than I think anybody else on the market. And we have shown that we're able to actually provide a really high quality internet service. Our highest speeds right now are 800 megabits per second. So
Is that synchronous or asynchronous?
it's synchronous, up and down. Our lowest is 25, which we offer. And that is also synchronous, and that meets most people's needs, but you know, there are people that need more and they have the ability to get more. I guess what I would say is that forming a CUD, I think that after a variety of years, of which part I was responsible for, being public service commissioner, it was like, hey, what's going on here? Everybody, we're supposedly saying that everybody's served, but nobody is served. And I feel a little guilty about that, truthfully. But in retrospect, I would say that, what I see here and what the state is doing now is they're modeling after what EC Fiber has accomplished and created a structure by which the CUDs can be formed, and you don't need private capital to form. You can, in fact, go to VITA to get loans to start up, and then we would expect that those would be converted to the private bond market through revenue bonds. As I said, we have been very successful with that, and there's no reason to think that you couldn't be successful with that. So maybe I'll stop there and ask if there are questions or how I can be most helpful.
Just for the sake of educating everybody here about, when you talk about, so the people who are you say you kind of have the 25, which is what most people are able to do, and you have go as high as 800. What would be the monthly cost of that?
Yeah. So for the 25, it's $72 a month, and for the 800, it's like $150, $175, something like that. And there are different rates for businesses versus residential, but it's in that ballpark.
What'd you say the 25 was?
72. And actually, we reduced it from 74 last year. Starting January 1st, we reduced it $2. Not a lot, but it's the right direction. And, we hope to be able to do that more if you can get more take rate, meaning number of customers per mile, is really important. And we're falling short of where we thought we'd be, but we're still able to do okay. But we're not able to do as okay as I wish we could.
What was the next level? You had 25, 25, 70?
25, 200. Yep. 25, 200.
That's okay.
Something and 800. So something between 200 and 800.
So what was it, the 200?
Well, what was it for the dollars for the 200 megabits per second is about 110.
And what are the take rates?
It's about 6 per mile. That was our goal. We're a little short of that sometimes.
At the 72?
I'm sorry.
So the economics.
Yeah.
At the 25, at the $72 a month, what percentage?
Oh, I'd say probably 40%, 50% of our customers are at the basic level.
And the next level up?
Probably about 20%.
Okay.
And then it divides up beyond that.
So 6 per mile regardless of whether you contract at 72 a month or 100 a month.
Correct. Yes, that's right. Doesn't really matter.
And that's at a cost of $25,000 a mile in round numbers?
No, about 30,000 a mile.
30,000.
Yep, 30,000 a mile is what it costs us to build it. Yep.
And that includes the drop?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. I represent the Lamoille County Planning Commission, and we have been working with about 7 towns. Our county in total has 10 towns, but 7 of them have been interested in working with us in trying to figure out how to move this forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent a fair amount of time educating ourselves about the landscape around us. And so one reason why when a suggestion was made to focus this discussion on the Communication Union District is, and I know we won't be able to answer that question, but is there an ideal size? We are, in comparison to what we are seeing with EC Fiber or Central Vermont, or even what's forming up in the Northeast Kingdom, And Chris, I know that you made your recommendation for the Northeast Kingdom for all 55 towns to focus on one rather than several.
Starting with the ones who are ready this year, which was about half.
Yeah.
About half, okay.
So let's say we have 7 towns here that have been actively participating with some activity happening around the county. So that's a bit of a conundrum. Would it make sense for these towns? Would it be a big enough district?
Yeah. I think probably 7 is enough, particularly looking in this area. But it's, the other thing that, like for EC Fiber, we're going to finish building out all our original 23 towns by this year. And they are now looking at expansion, like how to welcome other communities in that don't have a place to go, that are immediately surrounding us. So you could always start, I think, we could figure out, and you could figure out whether 7 is enough. The real key is the bond market, in my mind. So you've got $4 million available from VITA to get started, which is huge, and that's a great start, and that will get you started. And then I think the ideal would be to convert those to municipal revenue bonds as a CUD, and you're able to do that. And the key is to see if you've got enough volume to be able to support that. They will not, it's a little embarrassing, but they will not really talk to you if you're doing less than $6 million worth of bonding. It's just not worth it to them. They is the bond market, okay? It's not that the effort to go through it is particularly difficult, from what I see, or that the cost is not particularly high. It's just that to show that you are viable and of interest to the national bond market, they want that level of commitment. I would say that it's probably about. This is really rough, so please don't quote me on this. But you're probably talking about $1 million or $2 million per town. So that gives you an idea. If you have 7 towns, it's going to cost $14 to $20 million to do this. Yeah, you're in the ballpark to be able to do this.
And just to be sure to be clear, that's what you estimate the cost would be ballpark for building out each town, not for
Correct.
anything the town has to put up.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. Can I just clarify for everybody here and on the phone? This is really important, and thank you. All these are revenue bonds. They are not town obligations. So towns need to put up nothing. They are exposed to nothing, and they cannot be held accountable for anything. This is all about only selling these based on the revenue that's projected to come in, the 6 customers per mile, the number of miles you have, the number of customers you have, and that determines the feasibility of doing these bonds that can support the capital necessary to do the work. And so far, we in EC Fiber territory have been able to make that attractive to bond buyers, so that we're able to get the capital we need to do the work. But in no case, like if we collapse tomorrow and ValleyNet collapse tomorrow, the only recourse for those bondholders would be the revenue generated by people getting the service. So the town is never at risk, and that's really an important concept to make sure people understand.
One more question.
Mine or yours?
Mine.
Hers. That's the beauty of being the moderator.
How about, very neutral,
Right.
How about from the governance perspective? I understand that it's a huge lift for volunteers to pull this off, and perhaps a year or 2 even before the organizing happens. And I would worry that with a structure that is like up to 7 towns, there's going to be a possibility of a burnout. And I don't know if you have some advice or some perspective on how to deal with that, because
Yeah.
it's going to be a real issue in my view.
Yeah. So in EC fiber territory, the way we do this is we have a governing board. They're appointed. We have a member, a voting member from each town, plus an alternate. And each town gets 1 vote, regardless of its size in the district. And those members are appointed by the select board of the town. So that is pretty straightforward in terms of like representation on the governing board. But truthfully, ValleyNet, which is the operating company for this group, which is also a nonprofit, I want to reassure you, has a lot of the decision making in our region, and you may choose to allow that or not allow that. But I do think that any CUD that's forming, I do think it's important to, the reason we did 1 vote per town regardless of population was that the mission is to get to the outside rural areas, and to do that, we felt like we needed to have an equitable structure there. That said, we have 22 towns, so I have 46 people on a governing board, a room about 3 times the size. Once a month, meet and talk about what's being done and what we're doing and when we're going to get to the next step. So it can be hard to have towns work together, and yet I think the success shows that it gives people some comfort that they are actually going to get internet service and a quality internet service in a short period of time, relatively short period of time.
I have
I
a
don't know if you
question,
wanna-
if that's
yeah.
possible.
Sure.
So there's all these cuts starting around the state. In order to access the VITA funds, you have to be able to put up 10% to show that you have skin in the game. How do you get started before you get the funds, and how did EC Fiber do that?
Well, okay, so that is a new piece of information for me, and I apologize. I didn't realize you'd have to put up 10%. But EC Fiber started with private contributions, and it was a private enterprise at first, with $410,000 being put up by wealthy people in the territory that wanted high-speed internet. And we constructed, which I would never recommend, we constructed to those people as quickly as we could, which made a mess of the system in terms of like trying to actually design a system for the whole town. So don't do that. There are plenty of lessons learned, and I'm happy to come back and talk about all those at a future time. But they started with private capital. This is a new concept to me. I hadn't heard about this, where you had to come up with 10%. I don't know how you do that, truthfully.
Well, they went out, EC Fiber went out and got loans, quote, from many people.
Correct.
Not a huge number, but many people in each town.
Right, but we started with private capital. We showed that we could do it. We then went to we then got private loans, and then we have switched now to the municipal revenue bonding and paid all those off.
Right, but
We
the
paid the original
private
investors
loans
off.
were the bridge, if you will.
Yes,
probably.
yes, but I'm trying to figure out how to get, as a public entity, how you get multiple towns to get the 10%. I don't know, other than private investment. But as I say, that's a new thing for me. So let me think about that, and I'll try and get
Is that
back
the
to you.
$4 million you're talking about as the start of that?
No, because the $4 million that VITA is offering as a loan,
It's up to $4 million.
up to $4 million.
That doesn't have a 10%.
Does that have the?
That does have the 10%.
So that's what. And I'm sorry, your name, I missed it.
Rob Fish.
Rob, of course. Thank you, Rob. So Rob is talking about that, and I don't know how you do that without
So that's divided amongst 7 towns, theoretically?
They can't come from the revenues from the town.
Right, but it
Right.
could be the same model they did before, where they got loans from people.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah, they-
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
certainly
Like 2,500
Yeah,
something
exactly.
grants.
Yeah, exactly. You could
No
do
big
that.
deal.
You could, well, I don't know, but maybe not. I hope you're right. Yeah.
So how, market research to go apply for the loan, what do you have to show them in addition that you got the 10%?
I think you got to show them a ARPU, an accounts receivable before taxes that is positive. And
So pro forma, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yep.
Do you have to show them that we've surveyed the entire 60 miles in Johnson, and these are,
I don't think so, because I could be wrong about this, but I think, look, survey information is helpful, but the fact that this has now been successfully done in an area, and the people in Johnson are not substantially different than the people in Randolph or Braintree or Brookfield, I think you could make the argument that this model has been shown to work. But you might need survey information.
For the VITA funding, you will need a business plan. And that business plan could be created via a broadband innovation grant.
So, this is an
so
interesting.
you don't pay us to do the survey.
If you get the grants, maybe it would be a good time to actually go into a little bit about the big grant. Let me switch slides with you real quick here, because I have a few slides on that as well, that detail. Let me just skip around here a little bit. Okay.
Is it possible for you to send us that?
Certainly, yes. So the Broadband Innovation Grant was the other thing that was created in the legislation last year. The legislation last year created me. It created the VITA Fund, and yes, I am the human, as they refer to me up at the State House. So, it also created this Broadband Innovation Grant. It's a little bit of startup funds that's looking specifically at the feasibility of a project, and then if the state and with a third party determines that that solution is feasible, it will fund a business plan. So there's 2 different parts to each grant. And the goal of the program is to explore diversity of solutions, whether it's individual towns, whether it's CUDs, whether it's some model we haven't even thought of yet. So there's 3 rounds. It may actually end up being 3.5 rounds. The first round, there was 3 grants awarded, and I'll talk about who got those in a moment. This current round is only open to utilities. So once again, another model we're exploring, and there's only 2 grants. The final round, which may be in 2 parts, it's going to be opening probably the end of March, it could open sooner, is going to be 7 or 8 grants. So it's the biggest round. We may split it so that the people who are ready to go now can get access to funding sooner. So, and one thing just to be clear, that you're only getting access to the second half of it's up to $60,000. You're only getting access to the second half is if your plan is determined feasible.
So there's a feasibility study and followed by a business plan.
Yes, and this is what's included in both. Actually, I'm sorry, I thought I was on the full screen here. You should be able to see that a little better.
Oh, yeah.
So previously, a lot of the broadband grant funding was based on whether or not the town was considered adequately covered. So is this grant money also under that?
This is different.
Okay, so
This is
we
different.
actually
There's a
could-
few other pots. There's a few other pots of money that are out there, whether it's last mile or the connectivity that's focused on the least of the least served.
Right.
So this is looking at it more holistically.
So this is all where? You said it's up.
This is actually, a lot of this is on our website currently or will be soon, but I will also share the presentation. So you have it in different places.
And before I'll jump in briefly, we have actually, with the towns that we have been working with, we have, and we are still considering if there is a desire to put in a regional application for the Broadband Innovation Grant to do that. Before we finalize the decision on our end, we really would like to see more the town's position and where they're headed. Are they inclined to go a certain way? Have they determined But as where it stands right now, and for those who have been on my email list for the past 6 months, you are aware of this interest to apply on behalf of the region. We do have a support for that approach from the town of Johnson, the town of Hyde Park, and the town of Cambridge. Okay, so just before, we are thinking about this, but we haven't finalized because we really need to hear from you, because you might want to apply on your own as an individual town.
It looks like they're CUD districts that are applying.
Am I right? It varies. There were several applicants last time that were town by town. Like in the case of the Wyndham grant, I mentioned Marlboro earlier, how they're doing a RFP as well as becoming part of a CUD, as well as part of a study area. They also applied on their own for a grant, and they didn't receive it. So it's open to various models, and it depends on the quality of the proposal. And we can share the successful proposals with anyone who is interested in applying this time around to see what you could model it off of.
So how many, if there are X number of towns or districts, how many of these are going to go home empty in applications?
I think it all depends on how many apply and how many combinations. With the fact that there's 7 or 8 grants available next time around, and we know Wyndham County is covered entirely, I assume we're going to hear from the Kingdom crew. It's EC Fiber is not going to apply again.
No.
Like I think there's going to be plenty to go around for the feasibility studies. That being said, if 20 towns decide to go on their own, there's not enough funding for that.
But if those 20 towns combined into 7 or 8 CUDs, then.
Yep. Yeah, my assumption next round is we're going to hear from the Kingdom. We're going to, Bennington, that's getting organized now, that they're likely to apply. Those are the ones I know for sure. We already gave a grant for Central Vermont. I know the Rutland Regional Planning Commission I'm meeting with in a few weeks. So who knows? But I think there is going to be funds to go around, and I encourage you to get organized and figure out what you want to study the feasibility of. Do you want to study the feasibility of all of Lamoille County? Do you want to study the feasibility of, okay, Lamoille and parts of Franklin? Like even within a CUD, the towns don't need to be contiguous either.
You have to form the CUD first?
To apply for the grant? No, you do not have to do it first, but in order to, you're applying for a feasibility study to study something. You have to define what you're studying, what those options are. That tripped up some towns.
And I guess I would offer that we've yet to see a case where an individual town can do a feasibility study and make it work. So, we definitely think the CUD formula is a better option for you to work cooperatively with adjacent towns than it is to just try and go it alone. It's a volume thing. It's an economies of scale thing. It's also a design thing where, let's say a Brattleboro chose to go it alone, right? They've got cable built already downtown and to a substantial portion of their area. So the feasibility is going to be showing a negative there right now, whereas if they do it with surrounding towns that haven't got adequate service, then you can say, oh, well, we've got a bunch of other towns where we can get granted. It's more rural, there's less population, but the take rate is more likely to occur than it is if you just try and overbuild Comcast, right? So it's a mix, and it's a delicate balance of trying to figure out how big is manageable, but how much can you actually accomplish by in terms of the mission of trying to get to people who do not have either they're underserved or not served. That's really, at least that's for ValleyNet and EC Fiber, that's been our mission. And we've started from the outside, the more rural areas, and moved in. We have overbuilt some Comcast areas, but we're still evaluating whether that's cost effective, truthfully.
Is there any way to convince you or the state that overbuilding Comcast can be successful? I mean, for example,
maybe.
I have Comcast, I'll throw it away in a heartbeat.
I know, and there are a ton of people like you out there, and I get that. Again, our mission is to provide unserved and underserved first, and we're still evaluating the cost effectiveness of overbuilding. Because the truth is, a lot of people say, I'm not saying you're one of them, but right, a lot of people say, I would dump it in a minute, and then when you're there, say, I'm okay.
Yeah, talk is cheap.
Yep.
You know, you gotta get.
And we
people to sign.
can't have that after we built it, right? Yeah.
You guys seem pretty busy. What's a realistic time frame for if a group got together and got all their ducks in a row and you agreed to take it on?
Yeah, well, if you don't make the same mistakes we made, it would go like this. It's probably about a year of design work, of figuring out who wants to subscribe, what the design looks like, how many fibers you put in various places. And I strongly encourage designing one town at a time, making sure the whole design is done, making sure the make-ready applications, which is people physically, other companies moving their lines down on the poles so you can put a fiber on there, on the poles, doing the surveys, things like that, take about a year, truthfully. And then the construction is I won't say the least of it, but the construction takes a construction season for roughly, our experience is we can do 250 to 300 miles a year. So depending on how many miles you have in your system, that'll give you a rough rule of thumb. And then, I'd say obviously concurrent with the design, you can start figuring out the business aspects of it. Like how do you get subscribers? How do you identify those? How do you keep them informed as to what's going on? And I will tell you, people are never happy with how long it's going to take. But, from the time you form the CUD, you could do this in 3 years, is I think a fair estimate.
Online?
Hi.
Hi, talking about overbuilding, competition, I think there's the one elephant in the room that no one's really discussing, which is Starlink. Thinking of coming on, what I've heard, they're planning on coming online this year, and northern U.S., southern Canada are their target areas.
Is that the satellite group providing satellite internet?
Yeah, that's the Tesla satellite.
Tesla, right? Yeah, okay. So we are, we've heard of that. We're aware of it. We identified it as a risk in our bond offering, and it didn't seem to bother our bond purchasers very much.
I think in Vermont, you could make a fair argument that satellite is definitely not ideal.
Yeah.
I mean, tonight you wouldn't really have internet.
Even in Iowa, you can make that argument.
Right. I mean, the hard part is the reason we're doing fiber to the home is we know it works. And the wireless piece of this is tough. We've had wireless problems in Vermont with both wireless phones and wireless internet. And the satellite issue is troublesome because of, a day like this where we have, 2 inches of slush or whatever, it messes up satellites. So I get that. And so I'm not saying this is ideal, but because nobody likes more poles and more wires on poles, but this seems to work. So. And
I think the point is that, considering the latency and the lack of coverage, I agree that the traditional geostationary satellites are a woeful solution, but this does promise to be, I think, a lot more competitive than I think that it might be prudent to take a much closer look at and see how much competition it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I wish them well. I hope it works, but I don't know. But for the moment, you know, because we're where we are, we're trying to do something now, and as I say, the people who are purchasing the bonds, even though they understand this is a risk, are not feeling objectionable or not feeling put upon by the concept that there might be a satellite competitor.
So I put up on the screen, I just pulled up the website for the Vita Broadband Loan Program. And just going through it really quickly, it talks about what's specifically for startup broadband projects or expansion of existing networks. I know MC Fiber did receive a Vita loan, they were the first. It's eligible borrowers, but this is the thing. The maximum loan amount's $4 million. Maximum financing is up to 90% of project costs. So that is the challenge.
Yeah.
And I encourage you, if you have ideas on how to acquire that 10%, to contact Vita. We're a separate organization, but this is a challenge that I've been reaching out to the state's telehealth working group. We're looking at different banks with their community reinvestment, CRA, Community Reinvestment Authority, is that? I don't know.
It's good. It works for me, Rob.
A CRA of different ways to try to find and leverage other funding to help meet that 10%.
So what you're suggesting is you don't necessarily have to come up with the cash. You can just get another loan to provide that 10%.
It can be loans, it could be grants.
Can it be in kind, Rob?
That is a question I'm working to get answers to, but I encourage if anyone has an idea for an in-kind contribution, whether it's working with another provider and doing the engineering study that's saving them funds, does that count towards it? It's to reach out to Vita directly.
So one thing I wanted to just go back to an earlier part of the conversation is that one of the factors that weighed, and I think you've heard a number of examples tonight where in some ways the most difficult period for a CUD is the first period.
Yeah.
Right, is getting over the hump. Getting up to sort of a critical mass, getting operations showing that they can do it. That was one of the factors that weighed in our recommendation for the Northeast Kingdom to do a single CUD. Not because we thought the governance would be better with more towns, but because we believed that it was going to be easier to get over the hump once and then build on that, rather than try to get over that initial hump twice.
Right.
This is a question really for Leah and you, is how do we leverage the combination of having the planning district, which has been facilitating this conversation, and a possible CUD, and we only have like 7 towns in the group or counties in the group that are interested in doing this. But, I mean, is there any other place that there's been a planning commission that's been, that's really what I'm looking for, because we seem to have a good relationship in general.
That's what's happening in the kingdom, that's what's happening in Windham County. And I know Bennington's gonna start working with their planning commission a little bit more. And Rutland is calling me in for next month. So it's, the planning commissions are involved, and I think all thank Larry for what she's done with convening all this in the first place, of pulling everybody together to talk about this, because we don't need to recreate the wheel every single time with a different town going at it alone. We need to be sharing lessons learned, sharing the capacity we have to take on a project that's this big.
The one thing I would encourage you is I think within the region to figure out which towns have or can come to share kind of a common vision of what they want to at least study first, right? You have a couple of different models out there. For instance, the standard CUD model, but then also ones like Newbury's looking at a bit of a different kind of public-private partnership with Consolidated that I think there's some folks may have discussed looking at that. I think it's important that whichever towns are going to work together, sort of share a common vision of what they're going to study. I think if you share that, and let's say, for instance, it is a CUD, just for the sake of example, you could look at the economics of the unit, right? The economics of the 6 or 7 or however many towns you're going to get together sharing that common vision. That might lead you to, through the analysis, to say, yeah, we've got a viable, group of towns here. If not, I think it's still useful information where you could say, well, maybe this is a business case that we can apply to trying to join with a slightly larger group of towns. But I think the first step is really, of the towns that are sort of ready to go and I think ready to ready for opportunities like the big grants, is try to figure out if you do share a common vision or if you can get there.
Yeah. And, from our example, I would say that now that we're almost built out in the EC fiber territory, we have towns that declined to join early on that are kicking themselves and like, oh, I'm so sorry, can we join now? And they are, we are evaluating expansion to the adjacent communities, but the reality is that, some towns may choose to join and some may not, and they may have different reasons. I mean, there's no cost to them to engage in this process other than time commitment to work to try and get through it. But it is hard, and and towns may have different models and different missions. As I said, we have a commitment to get to every single house in our community. Now, we've had to actually modify that to say every house on the grid, because we're using telephone poles. And I had somebody today where they wanted EC fiber, but they're off grid and a mile off the nearest pole. It's like, okay, but you pay for everything from the nearest pole to your house. That's a mile at $7 a foot. That's a lot of money. And they're like, okay, well, I'm not doing that. But for the most part, we're meeting the obligation to get to every house.
I'm curious to ask, how does a CUD adapt to changing conditions? And what I mean by that is that maybe in the past, it hasn't been so much a case that private providers existing were interested in building out to our underserved rural areas. But we know that towards the end of the year, the federal government is planning on releasing, large amounts of funding to support the rural broadband build-out. And so I imagine that there must be some adaptability within the CUD, because if, say, consolidated applies and they build out, then there is really not much of a reason maybe to overbuild. Or I mean, how does a CUD strategize in such conditions? You invest into a certain type of a design, and before you are able to build it out, somebody else swoops in and builds out,
To that end, you said you were going to talk about the utility companies.
Another model that's being explored is, the utilities already have access to the poles.
Yes.
Whether they could be a provider or they could partner with a provider to build out. The grant applications are due, I think, in a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I know many of the utilities in the state are applying. They're going to be going through the same process of a feasibility study and then a business planning and then trying to figure out how they're going to fund it. They could also be a partner in the cut.
Yeah.
Yep.
You haven't seen that proposal?
No.
To address, I think, one of the elements of your question, the two largest federal funding opportunities, programs out there right now for broadband are the Reconnect program and from USDA and the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Reconnect applications from Vermont face a little bit of a challenge in that the USDA excludes areas where they have prior awardees, and much of Vermont was in the received a grant for a grant loan combination to VTEL, which obviously is not performing up to anybody's expectations, but still creates the challenge of getting the eligibility. The Rural Digital Opportunity Fund is a substantial opportunity. It's a substantial potential challenge in some areas for potential communications union districts. That auction is going to happen in two phases, a $16 billion phase and a $4 billion phase. The $16 billion is currently slated for October of this year. It is very likely in the areas that are eligible, somebody will win that subsidy. It's not perfectly, may not happen everywhere, but there's an excellent chance that in the areas that were eligible, somebody will win that subsidy. It's a little bit more of an issue in the Northeast Kingdom because the areas in Vermont that would qualify, we think, for this are disproportionately in that part of the state. But the challenge and the opportunity is that somebody's going to win that funding. Ideally, you want the entity to win that funding that's associated with your preferred solution. That the solution that wins could be anything from a subsidy for satellite providers up to a fiber to the premise network. More money is available for successful bidders doing fiber to the premise networks. But it's either going to be, in many areas, a subsidized competitor, or for those areas that are able to mobilize fast enough, a potential source of funding.
How political is that award process? And the reason I ask is you got a red state, Wyoming, where you're lucky to have 6 miles per customer versus a blue state like Vermont.
I wouldn't say that it's political, but it's based off of maps that are by census tracts. And the census tracts are a little bit bigger out there because they're even more sparsely populated. I think that's just a given. The mapping thing is something they're looking into and we'll continue to keep looking into.
Right. That's not less than, you're lucky to have 6 miles per customer.
Yeah, so the actual awards, I mean, the eligible areas are based on information that everybody knows has flaws in it, right? The $16 billion, they're going to use the flawed maps. The $4 billion, they're going to theoretically fix the maps and go after the areas that they missed the first time around. Their mixture is probably a little off on that, but in any event, the auction process itself is very mathematical. It is, literally a bidding process. The FCC has a model that says, this is how much we think it ought to cost to serve this, and bidders bid against that subsidy amount as a percentage of that subsidy. So the FCC says, I think it's going to, this area needs a $100 a month subsidy. The bidding may start at 180, and the winning bid may be 70 or 80, right? It just works its way down. The mechanics of, there's certainly some significant policy questions about how they structure the auction, but the auction itself is fairly mathematical.
I would want to follow up on the utility question a little bit. We've met with Rebecca Town, the CEO of the Vermont Electric Co-op, because we know that they are one of the companies that are applying for this round of the feasibility study. And she has actually shared with us their request for proposal in terms of, to give us some idea of what they are looking to evaluate. I'm hoping I'm interpreting this correctly, but I got a pretty clear message that what they're doing is very, very exploratory, and they would much more benefit from an approach where, let's say, a communications union district figures out their plan, their design, and then they talk to them to see where some partnership would be formed in enhancing the fiber optic network together
Mhm.
that would also serve the purposes of the Vermont Electric Co-op as an electric company, not as a broadband company.
Right.
So I feel at this point that that's not something that I would wait for, but it's really maybe something promising to keep in mind. But I do feel that in terms of broadband, it would be much more easier for them to step in if they see a plan coming from municipalities. Last week, there was a meeting here with Representative Peter Welsh. There was a representative from Velco here. I don't even know what they stand for, but all the electric distribution utilities are a member of it.
Mhm.
I think it's a transmission company.
It is,
electric
yeah, it
transmission
is.
company.
Yeah, it does a
They
transmission.
said they have fiber optic, mostly middle mile network available.
Yeah, that's how they communicate between all the
Mhm.
substations.
Yes,
Mhm.
that they are now, that not has been the case all the time, as my understanding, but that they would consider leasing. And that's where, like you said, that
Yeah.
your network is a combination of the state and EC
Yeah.
Fiber owned.
Yeah.
This could be another partner that could contribute to be a co-owner of a potential network. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that could be a resource. And I know, Chris, that you talked about it in your study with the Northeast Kingdom as a potential option.
Yeah, I mean, so in some areas, what a network like that would give you the ability to do would, leapfrog, right? So if you had, if you have a geographically large area, and you have kind of the main network over here, but you have a community where, the demand is there and, funding is available, instead of having to build a rather expensive line to get there, maybe you can, just drop into that community and start a second, if you will, point from which the network continues to
Right.
spread.
So we have kind of building on that. We actually, EC Fiber, Valley Net through EC Fiber leases some fiber from Velco to do that sort of thing. We also lease some fiber from the state that VTA, which Chris was involved in, built, and we use some of that fiber to get to where we need to get to. So those opportunities exist. I think I haven't dealt with Vermont Electric Co-op, but I have been dealing with Washington Electric Co-op a little bit. And I think that what the utilities are realizing is that this really does need to be a partnership. They don't want to run an internet system, but they do own the poles. So they do have the potential to do this easier than the process that we've been using, which is to apply, have everybody move down, construct fiber. They may be able to construct fiber in their electric space and then drop fiber access points down that we can all build in. We don't have the ability to work in the electric space. We don't want to. But if somebody drops something down a pole within our reach that isn't going to electrocute us, we can then use it, and that type of thing might be the mechanism by which utilities engagement can be advantageous from a cost standpoint and from a ability to get the thing done.
And if anybody wants to do any light reading, I say that sarcastically, there's a 150-page report on the Public Service Department website that evaluates the case for every electrical utility in the state. Entering the broadband market.
Do the electric utilities worry about the security issue?
Like hacking, or you mean security, like?
It's their fiber.
Right.
They're using it to go to their substation. They're connecting up another network to it.
Right.
It's different strands.
No, they're different strands, so they would not be worried about it any more than they already are worried about it, which they are worried about it.
Yeah, they follow a lot of regulations by NERC, the federal and FERC basically. So they have all of that stuff very, very protected.
What's the
I'll tell you something
Public
sometime.
Utilities Commission.
Well,
I used to work in the ball.
If you
so
do so,
I know too
I can
much.
send a link to, I can see if I can pull up the link. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
is this?
exactly.
That's, Mike can see it there. Actually, I'll have to send it to you because it's the easy way to get to it's not published at this point, but I did want to show you that all the new statistics are up on the Public Service Department website now. Breaks it for the entire
Cool.
state, as well as a spreadsheet so you can do your own calculations. We also just added today a new section that goes into, it's if you need legal advice, you should talk to your attorney, but we provided some, it says it's not legal, it's informational to answer some of the questions about a communication unit district and what dollars can be used for what. So that's all up here now as well. And then information
You're gonna
about.
send the link to Lee and Lee?
Yes.
Send it to all of us? Is that correct?
Yes.
Ian?
I haven't heard what you said.
He's gonna send it to you and you're gonna send it to us?
I can do that.
So I have a question in terms of the models long-term, pricing for consumers, what do you, if Consolidated came in and built out an area versus the what we've been talking about here, the cuts, what do you expect 10 years out pricing? Is there, the rush is to get into this now, but where are we later?
Well, I don't know, I've heard that 74 to 72, and I don't know if I've ever heard of an ISP lowering a price on something.
We did last.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. Like,
January
you said
1st.
74
Yeah,
to 72.
oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that.
There's a possibility if Consolidated is inspired to come in and build fiber, they already have access to the poles. They don't have as many make-ready costs, so the cost may be less. But these are all just assumptions. There's a lot of unknowns.
But wouldn't they have to run their own fiber? They wouldn't necessarily be able to piggyback, like if we were to build it out, we could say you can't piggyback our fiber.
Oh yeah, they wouldn't be piggybacking, they would be building out their own fiber.
They would, and they have, from whatever business model they're doing, they have chosen not to do that, right? They have chosen to do. They've done some fiber, but they ultimately end in copper at your home, and the DSL is limited in terms of its ability to provide speed and functionality, and they seem disinclined to invest in the more rural areas. That is why we exist. That's why we exist. We wouldn't do this if it was already being.
They are looking to partner with towns to possibly do this, and they've done it in New Hampshire, and I know they're certainly making the rounds of just explaining the coverage that they do provide and what they're thinking around the state.
Right. The problem with New Hampshire's model is that they are allowing Consolidated to do investments in areas that they feel are economically viable and not do the surrounding rural areas, which means those rural areas will never get served because it's not economical for Consolidated to do it. Now you've got somebody in the core dealing with the core stuff, and nobody else can come in and do the whole thing. So that's a fundamental problem, and it's again the reason we exist is because we have the mission of trying to get to every unserved location.
We work with a lot of communities around the country, generally outside of denser urban and some of the denser, maybe even to a certain extent, some of the denser suburban areas. You rarely see one mass market fiber network being overbuilt over another. I mean, it's rare even, it's not even common there, right? Much more common situation is where you have a fiber network that's being built in an area that only has DSL or fixed wireless competition, or in a dense area, you will have some areas where you have a fiber network being overbuilt over cable companies. But generally, in the kind of areas that you're talking about, the first fiber network that serves residents and small businesses is likely to be the
The
only
last,
provider.
I think that's right. I think that's
And
fair.
with any of these private providers, they're gonna go into the areas where they see the business case. The advantage of the cut is you can aggregate demand across communities of those places where the business case might not be as strong, like the edges of your communities, because it matters where the roads go. It doesn't matter where your town boundaries go. And when you enter an agreement with another company, they're gonna be focusing on the town boundaries. And they're gonna be most interested in building out the areas that are the densest to start. So you end up in a situation where you're not lifting up the entire region.
Right, right.
So we have about 10 more minutes to go. Questions or when, yeah, Hans?
This might be a dumb question, I might have just missed it in all of this, but what, EC fiber's a cut, right?
Yep.
You've got it all together. What is stopping you, because it sounds like, once you're done, you've got all these things in motion, you're willing to keep going. What's stopping you from like incorporating more towns or partnering with other ones? So like,
Yep.
we're here, we don't have a cut.
Right,
but
right.
It sounds like a lot of work to form one. It sounds a lot easier
Yeah.
to join one.
Yes, it is much easier to join one. If there's one existing, you can request to join it just by a vote of the select board. Whereas to form a CUD, you need 2 towns at least to have a vote in the town to support that. But more fundamentally, I will describe this. So ValleyNet is, as I described, ValleyNet is the company I manage, and we are the operator, the designer, and the builder for EC Fiber. EC Fiber has no employees. And up till recently, we've been synonymous, basically. We've been the same entity. And ValleyNet now is starting to, explore helping other CUDs and other municipalities. But once a month, I go to a board meeting that has, with 23 towns, 46 board members in a room talking to me about what they think I should do. So what keeps us from going to, 60 towns is because I'm gonna cry, and nobody on my ValleyNet board wants to see me cry. But that is gonna be what happens. So there is a size that is just too hard to manage to accommodate everybody. But, we've got 23 towns, CV is 14, Northeast, I don't know what they'll be, but, I'd say under 30, keep it under 30. But I do think more than 5 is needed, right? So, if I had to pick the 2 extremes, I'd say that's where it is.
There's also the logistical questions of if you're operating a service, how far do you want to run trucks out in order to provide service if something goes wrong?
Right.
Like how long did it take you to drive up here?
I know. Yeah, exactly. And if, Vermont, 7 months of winter and 5 months of poor sledding. Is, I
Out of curiosity too, for managing the lines, can you sub that out to your local electrical utility? I mean,
maybe that's where the partnership might come in.
If water and lights already going and checking all the tree branches anyway.
Yep, that's where the partnership could be helpful. And, we're even thinking, for CV5, we're located, ValleyNet's located in Royalton, which is pretty much center of our district. But, we struggle to get to the outer towns. And if they absorb more towns, even the adjacent ones, we're getting to the point where, we're working with Windham County, for example, and there's no way we can serve them from Royalton. So, we can do all the customer service support, we can do the billing, we can do the customer service kind of phone type things from there. But we'll never be able to, we provide the service we normally do, which is, if you call us, you got a problem, we'll be out there in an hour, right? We're not going to be able to do that. So unless we then created a satellite office or a truck roll from down south, and that's a real consideration of how that could work. But there are physical and geographical constraints to making this work well.
There's a guy from Charter Communications that is a repair guy whose house is about the next house next to mine.
Excellent.
So, you know, that's a model that seems to work.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
bet you get better service.
that's
I bet he
true.
does, I bet he gets real good service.
Yeah, yeah.
Is your organizational template, can you propagate that? You know, would it be
Yeah.
effective, you know, can we, you know, sitting on various select boards, can you send that out to Leah, and so we can look at it, we have something to bump up against? It seems to me there are things that need. something like
Explain
that.
a little more, because,
Well, they're a very good website.
yeah, so Valleynet, the organization that is actually doing this, is interested in helping other towns do this work. But we would need to coordinate that and figure out how we're going to service those areas with a satellite garage, if you will, with some trucks and some people that can service those.
No, I'm thinking about the original formation, you know,
Yep.
okay, the 7 towns or whatever, you know, I don't know that we're all interested, we've been
Yep.
attending meetings, we all perceive a need.
Yeah.
So I'm looking to say, well, give me an organizational document for.
Oh, yeah,
for
yeah,
that, you
yeah.
know, can we-
Yeah. So
Bylaws.
I'm sorry, what?
The bylaws?
Yeah, the bylaws,
You
exactly.
need to, you know, make it,
Yeah,
make
we
it
have
somewhat
those.
concrete, I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't looked into this, but.
The bylaws are on our website and they're available, they're public documents, and you can copy them, change the name.
Do you think they're appropriately downsizable?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And the legislation to create CUDs, it spells out pretty clearly what needs to be in the bylaws.
Right.
It's certainly inspired by what EC Fiber does. But that's another thing that will ideally soon be up on our website.
Is your are you going to generate some of, you know, some of these bylaws in competition, or, you know, sometimes these things there's no magic to them, but you have to get started, you know?
I'm developing a whole resource guide for the website. It's just state government takes a while to work through the approval process for getting things on the websites, let's say.
Yeah.
As part of that guide, there is a link to the bylaws for EC Fiber as a model that could be followed.
But I think what was said earlier is much more challenging than the bylaws, because those is what Chris said earlier, is that common vision. You know, that's what we are not sure with our towns here, what that vision is, because we have been, up until this point, we have been educating ourselves, we have been, you know, talking to providers. Some towns met with Consolidated, some towns met with Mansfield Community Fiber. So we had some regional meetings, and this was with an intent to provide some baseline knowledge. And now we are at a point where we, at least on our end, we are going to start guiding these discussions to see, is there a common vision or not?
When you say vision,
mission
what's the
statement.
variability here? I mean, fiber to every house and every business.
But it's also, it has to do with the structure. That's what, you know, we really are not sure whether our towns believe that CUDs are the structure to go. You know, I think that's what I mean on my end, at least, when I'm talking this. And as part of that is, you know, is it 100% to fiber vision, you know, fiber to every home, you know, where there has to be some common principles understood before we launch into the creation of this potential entity, if at all.
So one thing I would say, I mean, it seems, let's just like reduce it to 3 examples, right? So I would say, you know, one flavor could be, you know, a CUD along the lines of what EC Fiber has done and what the Northeast Kingdom is considering, right? Kind of a classic CUD model that likely does involve some sort of public-private partnership too, right? But it's a CUD along those lines. Something along the lines of what Newbury and some places in New Hampshire are considering with Consolidated, right? Where, you know, I think the relationship between the provider and the community is probably a little bit different, or Mansfield Community Fiber is another one that folks will talk. They may have a particular vision for the way that they want to approach this. I think that you should have, whatever your primary group is, have a primary vision of which one of these you're most drawn to, at least as a starting point. I'm not saying you never consider any of the other options, but I think you have to start somewhere. I think, if you're going to study the feasibility of something, study the feasibility of, for example, one of those three things.
Well, it was very simple for me to say, absolutely not over my dead body with Consolidated or Comcast.
Yeah.
That's simple. That's trivial.
Okay, then now you're swimming with the rest of us, which is like, there's no, right, what are you gonna do?
He's swimming with the rest of the Lamoille towns.
That's right.
I mean,
Exactly.
I've dealt with them, I've dealt with Comcast in a bunch of different places.
So when I will tell this story because I have no responsibility anymore, but when I was commissioner of the Public Service Department, we were during the Fairpoint strike, right, and Fairpoint problems. People were going to Consolidated from Fairpoint, and Consolidated was rated the worst customer service company in the country year after year, and yet that shows how bad it was that people were jumping from one to the other. No, they weren't. That's my point. They were like.
We actually did do it.
2 minutes remaining.
We did a survey here at Johnson. The fiber committee did a survey, and Comcast actually didn't do as badly with the customer service and the reliability as I thought they would.
Excellent.
But Consolidated, woof.
Yeah.
Nobody is happy with Consolidated.
Which is interesting because my experience has been Consolidated has been head and shoulders better than Fairpoint was. That may be a low bar. It's a low bar, but nonetheless, there you have it.
So next steps. What are the next steps? Do people want to work towards forming a CUD? Do you want to explore it individually as just your single town? Are you not ready to make that decision? Do you want to jump in with the kingdom, see if they'll take you?
Hyde Park can't do it on its own.
No, you
That's
can't.
simple. I don't think Johnson can, but I may be wrong. You guys, can you do it on your own?
Can I, I get to speak. I'm like
And I would also
I'm like
say,
Joe Biden.
big question, I really need to stop this at 8 o'clock because we have folks who are driving far away.
I got
It's a
5
huge
minutes.
question, maybe we can have you back, Rob, for a further discussion, but it would be along those lines. Next steps, which way to go, and should we be looking into that big feasibility study / business plan grant? We do need to know what territory we would be working with in case you want the planning commission to be involved, but
I can
rest
give- I
assured,
can give
you
you
will
some
hear
guidance.
from me soon.
I can give you some guidance from Johnson on that. We're looking at the map in Waterville, Cambridge, and Morrisville we should be working with.
Yeah. So can I ask a question? I'm sorry, Leah. I know you're trying to get out of here.
Well, I live in Johnson.
There you go. But I know I live in Randolph. I'll be on the road until tomorrow. But are any of the towns in Lamoille County, do they have on the ballot to form a CUD now? They don't. Okay. All right. So that's
We would not be able to address this at our town meeting.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Um,
Okay. There are about 35 towns around that do have it on. I just want to check. 44 now? Oh, wow.
The
Good.
May deadline is,
Yeah. Okay. No problem.
Does it have to be at a town meeting? Can you do a special meeting?
You can do a special meeting, and in order to say that you want to create a CUD and study the feasibility of that, you don't have to create the CUD first.
The one thing though, and if you have a different take on this, I'd be interested in hearing it, but the statute does say that the organizing meeting is very specific, the second Tuesday or Thursday in May of the year following the vote. So it doesn't say, it could be in June and,
I'd have to look into that. This is the first that I'm actually hearing that.
Yeah.
But if it's in the statute, it's something I need to tell the towns in Winter County and Bennington County, because they have me back there in the middle of April. I will check into that. Okay. 'Cause that
Well,
doesn't-
thank you all very much. Thank you, Leah. I'm sorry again to be late. Thank you.